And I was taken into a room which was initially confusing because I could see that it was a square shape, but it seemed spherical. So there was this real confusion about what am I in here?
Yeah.
And in the center of the room on a pedestal was this big sloping screen, and it was divided into thousands of or hundreds of little grids, like a maths grid, and superimposed over underneath that grid was our Milky Way galaxy, was our galaxy, and that's why I nicknamed it the Galaxy Screen. And he showed me how just by touching a grid, he could bring up into the air around in the room this a holographic display. You might want to call it augmented reality. So he could bring up whatever was in that. So be it a dust cloud, or be it a group of planets or whatever. Then he could zoom them in and out. So we played around with that for a bit. He let me touch some grids and see what came up. It was phenomenal, and I won't go into it, but he described what their database was like, which just completely blew Dr. Schild's mind when we talked about this. So then he said to me, okay, I'm going to show you something because this will help you with your sense of commitment in your life. And he reached into my mind, as I've described before, and he drew out a phrase which was, this will give you fire in your belly. So he then brought up the grid that had our planet in it, and he made it so that Earth was hanging there. And he talked about how something had happened in our recent past, which was extremely significant, which was why a lot of races have come to the planet before that time and just after. And he asked me to prepare myself because I was going to see something sobering. And then he began to reduce the size of the planet. And
you got to accentuate the positive. Wow, I feel good. A little bit of feel good goes a long way.
You're listening to Karen Swain, teacher of deliberate creation, accentuating the positive, showing you a way to a better life.
Accentuating the positive, it's not just fad, it's sanity. Who in their right mind would accentuate anything else?
If you feel like that's what you want to do.
Hello and welcome to another show, Accentuating the Positive with Karen Swain. Sorry, I've got a little bit of the, winter cold at the moment. I've got my lemon and ginger tea here. But I have another fascinating guest to introduce you to today. Her name is Suzy Hansen. And Suzy is the author of The Dual Soul Connection and The Alien Agenda for Human Advancement, with contribution by Dr. Rudy Schild, Emeritus Professor of Astrophysics, Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, Cambridge, USA. She's the mother of two sons. Suzy was a teacher for 28 years, teaching school children of many ages, as well as being a grief counsellor for many years as well. She's a researcher, investigator, author, and contactee experiencer herself, and the founding director of UFO or UFOCUS New Zealand. It's kind of like UFO, SUS. It's very clever the way you've done that, Suzy. A nationwide UFO sighting investigation and research network, and coordinator of the Communicatorlink, a support group for those experiences and contact-related phenomena. Suzy was instrumental in lobbying the New Zealand Chief of Defence for the release of the New Zealand UFO files in 2010-2011. Very good. I'm going to talk about that. Suzy has spent almost 41 years in the UFO field and has lectured internationally since 1997 about New Zealand UFO sightings and her own contact experiences. Suzy's focus for the last decade has been on encouraging members of the scientific community to participate in examining the wealth of science-related details contained in accounts and extraterrestrial contact. She lives in Tauranga on the beautiful island of New Zealand. So great to have you on the show, Suzy. Welcome.
thank you very much, Karen. Thank you. Very pleased to be talking to you today.
I tell you what, wow, your experiences. I've been watching a few of your YouTube clips. I haven't had time to read your book as yet, but the book sounds amazing, amazing, amazing. And you've such extensive experiences. I have one question I want to start you with before we get into your experience. Do you still have contact with them? Are they still taking you up there? And
Yes, I do. The contact has changed, I think, over the years, according to the place in the timeline, what I call the timeline at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I think that actually fewer people are actually being taken on board at the moment. It's very much a cyclic thing in the same way as a sighting investigator. I find that sightings seem to go in cycles. And at the moment, we seem to be in a real dip in that cycle, a downward dip, where there doesn't seem to be much happening. And I think the same relates to the contact field. My most recent contact was just before I spoke at the UFO Congress in the States. And it seems to be that when I'm about to do something, I get a contact and come away with it with some information or insight that's very useful.
Wow. So is the contact, are they taking you in your physical body, or are they taking you out of your physical into your astral body? How is it happening?
In the early days, it was almost always in the physical body.
Yeah.
And then, back in the 70s and 80s and early and 90s even.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for me, at least, it has changed where I go in the astral body, go as a ball of light, if I can put it that way. There are other ways that they can speak to you telepathically, etc.
Exactly. I've been thinking about this because humans are pretty smelly. I don't know what if they smell, I don't know what their olfactory sense is like, but humans are pretty smelly. If someone has alcohol or garlic or beer, if you're on a bus, humans are smelly. I would imagine that to extraterrestrial life who don't eat, they would be pretty hygienic. Their environment would be so different to ours that the human body would be pretty offensive to them. That's what I'm thinking.
Yes, I think that's quite right. Actually, I know they get very frustrated with us, but in my experience, they do eat, but it's not eating as we know it. But
right.
They do absorb and consume.
Yeah.
However, I think that they definitely have a very advanced olfactory abilities because in the book I describe how on one occasion I was involved in a healing or medical healing session on a craft where one of the entities actually was smelling the cancer on a human who'd been taken on board the craft, and that was many, many years ago. And we now know that dogs can do this because they've got that advanced olfactory ability, and that now I just saw in the news the other day that a woman who can actually smell cancer on people on their breath. So there's quite a lot of things that I have talked about over the years that at the time seemed like science fiction, and I almost felt self-conscious talking about these things because they were quite out there. And in the last 10 years ago, much of what I talked about decades ago is now being confirmed by science, and some of that technology is actually being constructed by us.
I know. Oh, there's so much to talk about. I just want to tell you a little story. A friend of mine's sister was diagnosed with cancer recently, and the reason that she went to the doctor was her cat kept hitting her breast and just kept, and she's like, go away. But the cat persisted, and so she went to the doctor and she had breast cancer. Yeah, the animals, they know. Okay, so, I wondered about that because, I think children probably they're less offensive, their physical body, to the aliens than adults, and the older we get, I think the smellier we get too. And
they have been known to talk to experiencers and abductees about the fact that we have parasites and we have things that live on our skin and
exactly
our hair, etc., that they don't have. So
exactly,
they're unclean.
Speaking to Donna Lynn was one of the last contact shows I did, and a lot of what they do to us is not to hurt us, but to protect them, because they're so, they don't have the parasites that live on their skin and the stuff that live in. I know, it's like when you look under the microscope at what lives on us, it's just like it's a farm. All right, so and they don't have that, so they need to protect themselves in some way from our, if they take our physical bodies up on the craft. So today they're basically just taking your essence, your soul, your consciousness out, and you're hanging out up there as a ball of light, are you, or are you in an astral form?
Yes, usually in a ball of light, but there have been physical body contacts as well in the last 8 years. They have been fewer than they have been in the past.
Oh, wow. Okay, so this all started. Okay, the next question I want to ask you really is the dual soul connection. What do you mean by the dual soul connection?
Okay, well, I describe in Chapter 9 of my book, Soul Origin, how I had a flashback kind of memory many years ago of actually what I assumed at the time was me coming into this life. And it was about 20 years went by before I got brave enough to actually explore it in hypnotherapy. But what I recalled was being in front of a group of mixed species. There were entities that looked like us, human-like. There were others. There were balls of light. There was a whole spectrum of entities that I was in front of, and I was in front of them in the form of a ball of purple light, and I was accompanied by a ball of blue light. And through consciousness, we were all able to converse, if I can put it that way, hold this conversation, which was rather like a job interview, because the discussion taking place was around whether or not I could do certain tasks in my life, and whether or not I was willing to do some of those tasks in association with what we know as extraterrestrial species. And when I made that decision that I was willing to do that, they assessed whether they thought I was up to doing it. And so there immediately goes our concept of free will, because it was a consensus decision. It wasn't a decision solely made by me. And when I said yes, I would be willing to do that, then what took place after that, before I incarnated here as Suzy Hansen, was a contact and training period on board a grey craft, where as a ball of light with others, I was actually educated and prepared for this life and in the programs that I talk about, the agenda that I talk about. And part of that was, before incarnation, my soul was melded with a piece of consciousness from one of the greys. So we had this dual consciousness, this dual soul ability that is able to tap into their reality and tap into their consciousness at certain times when it's necessary to do so. I've actually been approached by a number of people since my book came out, describing very, very similar memories that they have, memories of going on board craft as children and being told about this as I was. The earliest recollection was when I was 8 years old, and it was discussed with me. So there's other people out there with this same understanding, and it's been very interesting to look at how they describe it and what they've experienced and what they believe their tasks are and what they're doing in life at present. So in the next book that I'm writing at the moment, I'll be going much more into this dual soul and the use of the consciousness.
Wonderful. Oh, wonderful. Because this part of it, fascinates me. Yeah, because as I said, Donna Lynn, have you met Donna? She's an American.
No,
she described similar but different. When I spoke to her on the show, she said that she was, she saw herself with the ETs choosing what she would do on this life, and she had like a plate and she was picking things up and putting it on her plate, and they were saying, oh, it's a bit much, divorce, sickness, whatever. And she said one of the things she put on her plate was lifetime ET contact, which is what you're talking about. So you said that you take a bit of the consciousness of an alien consciousness, soul, I don't know what to call it, soul consciousness, and it melds with your spirit or the part of you that will incarnate. Yes,
that's right. And it's interesting you've just mentioned the phrase part of you that will incarnate, because during this process that I describe, when I woke up in the field of consciousness and was offered 2 different lives, this one and another one, which incidentally was as an intelligent sponge-like form on a newly developing planet, I actually had this feeling of being drawn to this life and knowing that there was something very difficult to do in it, and knowing that it wasn't going to be an easy life. So it actually hasn't been so far either.
Is anybody's life easy? I mean,
exactly, yes. Not these days.
Oh, some people, I suppose, but I know a few people have had a pretty easy life, but many people. Yeah, well, that's interesting to make that choice between a sponge-like formation and it seems a very different choice. It seems like a completely, maybe you had many other choices that you don't remember. They were just the ones that they let you remember.
No, actually, I was offered about 5 and I narrowed it down to those 2. And I was given the opportunity to look into those lives, and it was explained to me that both of those lives would require the same level of commitment.
Right.
And the word commitment was the key word for this life, and it would have been the key word for that life as well. Mm-hmm. And just recently, actually, I was doing some research on the internet and saw that it was in our newspaper here in New Zealand too, that scientists are saying that one of the earliest forms of life on a developing planet, which is what was described to me, it was a sponge-like form.
Wow.
So it's very interesting that that's the other life that I could have lived, but I decided that something that had a bit more content to it than sitting in one place, providing a new life form that would eventually develop, was just a bit too boring.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, wow. Okay. So, in your book, it says here that at the age of 20, your life changed on a lonely country road in daylight as your car was engulfed in a massive ball of white light, resulting in 90 minutes of missing time. But you actually had childhood connections. What was happening at 20? Did you not remember your childhood contacts when you were 20 and then this experience brought it all back? What was happening?
Well, in childhood, I had quite a lot of experiences and memories, but I was only a child, and in those days, in 1950s and 60s New Zealand, everyone went to church, or most people went to church on a Sunday. It was a community thing that you did, and I went to Sunday school and was brought up for quite a lot of my childhood in that kind of environment. And so my mother's family was very psychic. They, my great aunts and my grandmother, my mother and brothers and sisters were all very psychic people who had precognition and all that kind of thing that many experiencers describe. And so when I talked about this, it was couched to me in terms of being a guardian angel or being a family member who's passed over, who was coming in to look on me. But the entities that appeared by my bed at night didn't look anything like an angel. They didn't look anything like a relative. They were golden silhouettes. They didn't let me see at that age their distinct characteristics. So I saw these golden silhouettes by my bed that emitted a very loving feeling towards me that would tell me they were taking me somewhere. Then I wouldn't remember any more in the middle. And then I'd remember sometimes them bringing me back and thanking me, and I would just go straight to sleep. So those were quite loving, pleasant memories. But when this incident of missing time and my car being engulfed in white light and being lifted off the road, and then some missing time happening, that seemed like something very different to me. And at that time, I didn't relate it back to my childhood memories.
Okay.
And I went through quite a few years into my late 20s and early 30s where I questioned what was happening to me, because I had more incidents like that happen with the missing time and quite frightening things happening around those incidents. And it took some years to come to terms with the fact that some contact was happening. We were hearing in New Zealand little whispers and stories of reports from the States of abductions, etc. And it seemed to me like that may be what I was experiencing. But the stories that we were hearing in New Zealand were very negative. And although the circumstances surrounding some of those experiences were frightening, like your car being engulfed and lifted off the road, the memories...
Sounds exciting to me, but anyway.
The memories I began developing of what took place, I began to have more and more conscious memory. Those weren't scary memories. And so in my early 30s, I had a catalyst contact where I realised that I was not being hurt, and that these were actually the same entities who'd been working with me as a child, and all fear just left me just like that.
Okay. All right. So as a child, you're having these angels visit you, your mum's saying, oh, it's angels, and you're going, lovely, I've got angels coming. And then as a young adult, you're like missing time, I don't know, like confusion. And then in your 30s, it's like the pennies dropped and it's like all fallen into place. Okay. And so in your 30s, how often were they coming to collect you?
Well, I have quite a substantial amount of memories of those, some of which I describe in my book, some of which I'll be utilising in my next book because they characterise certain things that I want to talk about in that book. But, I don't know how many others I had that I don't recall. And I actually still have a lot of partial memories that I've never explored in regression. I can remember the beginnings and the ends or pieces from the middle of events. But there are quite a number where I remember virtually the entire episode, and those are the ones that I've been really focusing on recently in terms of the technology that I observed and used. And I've developed speeches about that technology and been contacted by a lot of scientists who are confirming what I have said and have said for decades.
So is your commitment in this lifetime, so I'm just reading the Alien Agenda for Human Advancement. So your agenda as a dual soul is to help the advancement of human consciousness or human technology, or both?
Well, I think the task within the programs that I outline is actually quite complex, and you can't just say, well, it's this or it's that, because it's a number of those things mixed together. But yes, there's probably millions of people involved in this, and it's about raising our consciousness and I know that that's actually become a very trite phrase that is used almost to the point where it's meaningless now.
No, it's not meaningless at all.
I don't think
it's what I've dedicated my life to, Suzy. It's not meaningless at all to me.
That's right. But to skeptics and to people who don't understand or who don't follow spiritual things and who don't follow the UFO field, who are outside of the movement to raise consciousness and clean up the environment and all of those awareness kind of things, it doesn't necessarily mean a lot to them. And those are the people that we actually need to reach. It's all very well speaking to the converted, but it's actually the unconverted and the people who never think about these things that we actually have to wake up, and that's what I was trying to say.
I know. Look, I have my brother staying with me at the moment, events. He's been living in Perth, he lost his job, he's got a new job in Sydney, so his family's over there, he's staying with me until his family can come back. Anyway, and I've been knocking on his door talking about aliens and stuff, and I said, do you believe in them? Like a few weeks ago, he came and stayed with me for a week, and then he went back and came back again, and he was like, I'd like to think that they're real. Like, just the level of hypnosis that he's under. Let me tell you, I put on the television you speaking to Suma last night, and just that one of the little clips she's got, like the 2 minutes clips. And I said, so what do you think of this? And he couldn't even hear it. It's like, it doesn't exist. It's like he's hypnotized. It's just bizarre. It's bizarre. He just kind of goes, interesting. And he's like on his computer, and it's like, oh yeah, interesting. Like it's bizarre. The level of non-awareness. Yeah.
Well, I think it also relates to what the ETs call the readiness of humanity and the preparatory stage that many people have to go through. And so the preparatory stage is this constant chipping away, you know, the drop of water dripping,
Right.
repetitive reminding that this exists, you know, have you thought about this? And it can be, there can be a lot of repetition before something happens in a person's life that suddenly wakes them up or shakes them up and makes them think, hang on a minute, I need to look at this. So, you know, and everyone is waking up at different stages for different reasons according to what's happening in their life and what they need to do. So I've actually over the years become a lot more patient. I don't try to convert anyone. If people don't believe me or don't want to know, it doesn't worry me at all, because maybe their purpose is different to mine, and maybe it's not necessary for them to even think about these things just now.
Yeah.
And sometimes people need to be really hit in the face with something before they'll pay attention to it.
Yeah, exactly. But what's really interesting, both my brothers, I've got two brothers, are absolutely obsessed with sci-fi. Obsessed.
You often find that because there are subtle messages, as you know, Karen, coming through sci-fi that they are absorbing nevertheless.
Absolutely, absolutely. But most sci-fi Hollywood stuff is so negative. It's so boring to me. That your story, I wish we could get your story in a movie because it's so fascinating and it doesn't involve chasing and killing and, you know, all the stuff that Hollywood movies think sells movies. Okay. So ET communication. What have I got written down? I jotted down a couple of things. I think we've talked about the agenda. Yes, that was something I was thinking about. I was listening to somebody else talk about the ET mind, because obviously they think so differently to us, because we have to slow down our thinking in order to actually bring it out of our mouth. I know because I have connection to what I call my mob. Some of them are galactic and some of them are, you know, I've got a whole, you know, range of people, beings that I speak to. And I ask them so often to turn it down, because it comes so fast that my poor little brain cannot cope. And then trying to get the words out as I'm receiving the communication, I'm falling over my words as I keep getting these downloads of information. So when you're communicating telepathically with these beings, does your mind speed up? Does theirs slow down? I mean, how does that work?
Okay, well, I think the key to that for people like myself and many others who've gone on craft since early childhood, or basically from birth in terms of being on the craft as a human.
Yeah.
I think it's the regularity and it's the growing with it from a baby, right from babyhood, being on a craft in what I call the playrooms, where you mix with other mixed species and with greys and other species, as well as human children. And you learn the telepathic communication just through experience and spending time with them. You learn a lot of skills under the guidance of the carers, the grey carers in those rooms who give you assistance and guidance. So by the time you reach teenager or adulthood, you're actually quite adept at communicating with them. But having said that, they're still light years ahead in terms of what they can do that we can't do yet. Yeah. We are, I believe, and I think it's quite obvious in science and technology now, that we are going to become more of a telepathic society. Absolutely. We're seeing that now in, telepathically being able to move cursors and with our mind and do things with our mind, particularly for the disabled. That's where it's really beginning. And I know that they can do things like they can actually cut out a whole half of a room if they're communicating telepathically and they don't want someone to hear. They can actually exclude that person. When we think about telepathy, we think about a thought just going out there and anyone who's able to pick it up can pick it up. Right. But with them, that is not actually the case. They can actually send out multiple telepathic messages at once, as I describe in my book. So when you go on the craft, if you're there for a very short time and the time frame is, they have to be very officious about it because they're bringing people on and off the craft for different reasons, then they will ask you, they'll just say raise up is what they convey to you, and you have learned from childhood to expand your aura, get your awareness up, start that intense focus that they are capable of, so that when the activity begins, you're right there, ready to do it in the best possible way. So it's more about us reaching up to them, but they are very patient and they can reach down to us. And a lot of the script and things that I have seen on craft that they are producing are bridging scripts, bridging computers, etc., that are halfway between what they've got and what we're producing now, so that the leap isn't too far for a lot of humans coming on the craft.
Right. Focus. That is just, yeah, because humans are just so scattered in their focus. They're thinking of a million things, they're distracted, they're on their iPhones, they're driving the car, they're texting, we're so scattered, and they've just they've just honed this focus. But something that you said
they described it to me on one occasion, because they can reach into your mind,
right,
pull out a word or a phrase or a concept that you understand, and then they couch their explanation using that. So they bounce it back to you. And
but that's exactly what my mob do to me to help me teach. They reach in and they take my memories and they give me my memories, and then they bring it back to me in the way I understand it. And then I'm speaking something and I go, oh yeah, that's really cool. Like I'm getting it as I'm speaking it, like I call it channeling or whatever, but it's me speaking, it's my memory, but it's like they've given it back to me. It's just
and they've enhanced it in some way. They've added to it. It's usually what happens.
Used it as a descriptive of a concept that I'm trying to, or they're trying to relay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but it just sounds very normal. It just sounds like me speaking. No one would know it was any different, because it's just me speaking and it's using my memories, or I'm relaying what somebody else has told me. It's just really normal. Do you know what I mean? It just makes it all really normal.
Yeah, that's right. And they think that humans are rather fickle, is the word they pulled out of my mind on one occasion.
Right.
Where we can be very indecisive and we're quite fickle. We like one thing one day and the next day it's yesterday's news.
Yeah.
So that's probably the main character trait that they've found the most difficult, along with aggression, is our fickleness.
Right. So I heard you say in another interview that, the level of their consciousness is so different to us, because they don't engage in the denser emotions like jealousy or envy, or or rage or anger. They don't have access, or they've moved beyond that sort of way of thinking and way of feeling, but yet they do have disappointment or frustration. Like you said that they felt a little sort of frustrated with you, like, oh God.
Yes, yep. There's definitely that sense of frustration, but they're very patient. And what was I going to say? Sorry, it slipped my mind now. I was going to comment.
Well, the jealousy or envy, yeah.
I think what they have is the master analysts.
Right.
Is the way I would put it. They are able to put emotions aside, and they do have emotions. They're able to put those emotions aside, and they're able to look at things with great clarity and objectivity,
right,
with great logic and with advanced analytical skills, and they just cut right through something and bang, there's the answer or the course of action or whatever. And so I think that development in their culture has enabled them to drop away any other negative kind of emotional traits, because everything just comes down to analysis. Well, let's look at it. Okay, this is what we'll do. This is how we feel about it or whatever. And it's very, very logical and quite officious when you're on the craft. Their way of relating sometimes can seem almost impersonal. It's not really impersonal from my perspective. It's just that they are being objective, clear, focused, and analytical.
Like Mr. Spock.
Yes, good example.
Yeah, I know a few people like that. Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, so do they actually find our emotions appealing in any way, or do they think they're silly, the way that we get so emotional? Maybe, the way we experience excitement or joy or trepidation or anxiety. Do they find that interesting or intriguing, or are they beyond it?
Well, that's an interesting question, Karen, because I mean, if I put my researcher hat on, and I don't give you an actual personal answer just at the moment, if I put my researcher hat on, there's a lot of people out there who say that they have lost their emotions and they want our emotions. They want to learn from us. And I don't know that they've lost their emotions. As I described before, I think they've moved past that to the analytical clarity.
Right.
So they find our emotions somewhat amusing, and they can contribute to those emotions and have a sense of humour. And I'll give you a quick example. I was following along behind a grey who was piloting a craft. A small craft I was going on to. He was returning me home.
Right.
And I was walking behind him, and I was looking around in this hangar at all the different craft and thinking, wow, these are wonderful. And he conveyed to my mind an image of himself flying a human fighter plane.
I've got the image. I got it immediately.
A human fighter plane, and there he is, and he's got a leather cap and everything, and goggles.
Yeah.
And he's putting it into my mind, and just to amuse me. And I sort of telepathically went, oh yeah, something like that, just a flippant thought about it. And so he conveyed another one, and he'd already reached into my mind, found something I was familiar with, which was a program on a kids program years ago, where they fly around in little open spacecraft.
Okay.
And so he then conveyed that to me. So a comic style one. So he was actually having a little repartee with me while we were walking to the craft, and it was all telepathic. But it showed that he was appealing to my sense of humour. He was coming down to meet my sense of humour and what would make me happy and amuse me. And you mentioned joy before. They certainly experience that. And in one of the chapters in my book, A Glimpse of Cosmic Culture, this was the chapter when I first started working with Dr. Schild, Rudy. This was the chapter I was the least keen to send to him, because I thought he won't understand this. This is just going to sound too way out. And he said, give me the worst chapter you've got. Give me the one you think is the most out there. So I sent that one.
Yeah.
And that was the one he came back with some of the most comments about, and from an astrophysics and cosmological point of view, that was the one he understood. And that was where they disintegrated their bodies, and in this room that I referred to as the big brain, where there was this very enhanced consciousness that we don't know anything about yet, but they were able to experience this amazing sense of joy and well-being and happiness, which they conveyed to us. And there were 7 humans in that room watching them and experiencing this, and we all broke down and cried because the joy was so intense. It became tearful and almost painful.
Wow, that's amazing, Suzy. That's just amazing.
It was very interesting.
As you talk about it, I see it in my mind. I just want to sit there for a minute and just experience that. You've got me lost in that story now. So why did Rudy find that so fascinating? Sorry, my nose is running. As an astrophysicist, why did he find that chapter so fascinating?
Well, it was more as a cosmologist that he appreciated that, and looking at studying consciousness and aspects of consciousness for many years.
Right.
Because that chapter, in that chapter, I describe so many different aspects of consciousness as we moved through this experience, that they'd taken us into a room specifically to experience, and they actually wanted to see. They had a small group of humans. We'd all been on board craft since children. We were part of these programs. and they actually wanted to see how far they could take us. What they wanted to do was see if we could actually disintegrate the atomic structure of the body. And none of us could, but we got as close as probably humans could get to that. And they told us afterwards, this is what humans will do far in the future.
Right.
And they just wanted to see with the training they'd given us whether we could just let go enough to do that. We couldn't on that occasion.
So you were in your physical, you were a child at this point?
No, I was an adult.
Oh, you're an adult, and you're in your physical body, you're in your human meat suit. And they were asking you to focus in a way that would disintegrate the body.
Yes.
So like you would become invisible,
No, we watched them. One of the Grey who was facilitating it, shall I say,
right.
was communicating with us telepathically, saying what they were going to do, telling us not to panic. You're going to see something take place.
Right.
And then they warned us that they would start to disintegrate. And we saw, my husband's done some wonderful images of this. He's not a graphic artist, but, he's done a good job, I think. And they began to disintegrate. And as they began to disintegrate and spiral, they changed that. It was like a mist. It was like a coloured mist, and they all were using different colours that disintegrated and swirled around and combined together. And then they asked us to start participating. So first of all, they said, could we think of something, an object we would like them to form using that coloured mist. So we had someone thought, a pencil. So a pencil appeared in the air. A lotus flower appeared in the air. A bumblebee appeared in the air. They just went and they were showing us how matter can disintegrate and then reform. And it was reforming differently to how it originated. So I still talk to Rudy about this. The last talk I had with him about this was 3 hours long when I went to stay with him in the States. And so I'm still trying to get my head around this experience myself and look at the different factors that I described within it. And that was what really attracted Rudy to it, was this description of consciousness and what took place in this room that was enhanced by a particular light.
Right.
A bright light.
It's so interesting. Yogananda talks in his book about his teacher who had left his body, doing exactly the same thing, reforming out of the cosmos, the atoms in a physical body, and he came back to him as a physical form in a body that looked like his teacher, and touched him and gave him a hug and then dematerialized. And at the time I read that, which was many years ago, I'm like, nah. Nah. But and then many years ago, when I was almost a kid, like a teenager, I went to see a psychic, and he told me his little dog did the same thing after he died, and jumped up on his knee and said, thank you for being a great, so nice to me. And again, when I was young, I'm like, nah. So it's so fun, but it's so fascinating.
That's a wonderful little story. Thanks, Karen. That's really interesting. That animals, it's not just humans or entities. It's all kinds of objects or forms that have consciousness. It's as simple as that. Yeah. And after my book came out, I was contacted by a gentleman in the States called Carlos, and he said, Suzy, what you've described in that chapter, I've experienced on a craft too. And he said, get Dr. John Mack's book, Abduction. I am chapter 7, I think 7 or 8, I think it was, and I'm the Carlos he talks about in his book. Right. So I rushed to my cupboard and got the book out, and oh my goodness. I got out a ruler and a pen, and I started underlining everything that was the same that we were describing, and the whole chapter was just full of lines. So we are still in communication today, We are
Right.
still making sense of something that we can both describe almost identically. And I think that's it's very encouraging when you get that corroboration between experiences.
It's so exciting, don't you think? Like, I mean, the evolution of human consciousness is so exciting. You turn on Netflix or mainstream television and try and watch something entertaining, and it's so boring because it's just the regurgitation of the same thing. It's, like mystery or it's just so boring. And when you think about what we can do with our consciousness and where we could go and how entertaining this could be, it's just...
Yes, that's right, Karen. And I was talking on Skype to a group in the States the other day, and this is what we were talking, exactly what we were talking about was the frequency that is emitted by those kinds of programs. And, sometimes there are entertaining, good things on television and sometimes there are not. But I think people are becoming more aware of what frequency is emitted by that program, and does it match me? Does it actually make me feel good, or should I just turn this off and not watch this? And it's the same with music, it's the same with advertising and all sorts of things. I think people are becoming much more aware of the frequency that's given off by things and whether or not that feels good or not.
Absolutely. We've got this amazing guidance system. Absolutely. Yeah. But I do, anyway, I'm not going to go there. My sister-in-law watches those endless crime things, and just hypnotized, sitting there, this stuff pumping into her brain. It's like all about violence. Okay, so let's talk about the, your mob. You said that when you're on craft, there's a whole lot of different aliens. It's not like you're just speaking to one group. And you call them the greys, but the greys, it's a bit like saying humans. When you look at humans, there's so many different types of humans. So the greys are the same, aren't they? They're just like, do you want to talk about the different types of greys?
Well, the enigma for me is the abduction experience that people talk about. I don't call myself an abductee, although sometimes people label me as that incorrectly.
Yeah. Contactee would be a better word, wouldn't it?
Well, contactee is already taken by, back in the 50s and 60s by a different group, but a lot of people these days are calling themselves a contactee. I call us all communicators, simply lumping us under one umbrella, because that's what we're doing.
Right.
And try to break down those barriers that exist between the groups. Sometimes there can be a lot of antagonism between those various groups about what they've experienced and how they feel about the ETs, and I understand that. Having been through that little fearful patch myself, I know what that feels like. But yeah, on the craft, certain ET races or species have been called here by what I call our spiritual hierarchy of this planet, who oversee the incarnation of souls onto the planet. And they put out a call for help because they could foresee what was happening on the planet, that we were developing technology that wasn't keeping pace with our development of spirituality and consciousness. We're getting ahead with our technology and we're using it to hurt and harm and maim, rather than to nurture the planet and to nurture humanity. So I think depending on whether you're involved in the agenda I describe, you will see a species of grey. And I say a species of grey because it would appear from what many abductees say that there are a variety of species, and some behave quite negatively and others do not. But certainly on the craft I've been on to, I have seen mantids, I've seen various forms of greys, and I've seen human-like entities, very tall and thin, very Nordic looking.
Right.
And I've seen mixtures of all of these, and that's where the real differences start coming in terms of eye shape, eye colour, the way they communicate, their physical form, the colour of their skin, the texture of their skin, and how they operate. So I think that there's just as much diversity out there and intermixtures as is on our own planet.
Yeah, exactly.
And I describe in my book when I spoke to the human-like, tall, thin, human-like beings, it was like telepathically communicating. I likened it to speaking to someone who's speaking English with a slight accent, with a slight, like listening to a German person speak English or a Chinese person speak English. There was almost a telepathic dialectual difference, if I can put it that way. So these are all things that many humans have grown up on board craft, experiencing and seeing, and the diversity is certainly out there.
Yeah. Wow. So it's always been a benevolent, experience for you with all of them. None of them have had any sort of malevolent agenda, have they?
No, I've never ever experienced anything malevolent, dangerous, hurtful or harmful. The only things that got me initially and frightened me was the missing time and circumstances under which that happened. But as I moved further along the track, I began to understand why it happened that way and why it had to happen that way. And through that process of coming to terms with it and looking at it and understanding it, that took me forward many, many steps in the whole process. So it was very valuable when I look back on it. That time of assimilation and coming to terms with my experiences was extremely valuable.
Yeah. So do you think that a lot of the fear that we experience as humans is just a misunderstanding? It's just a not knowing, like false evidence appearing real. It's just that we don't understand it, so we become terrified.
Are you meaning, Karen, in terms of ET contact?
Yeah, in terms of ET contact, yeah, exactly.
Okay, putting my researcher hat on, I can say that it may be that some people, they may lapse out of the altered state of awareness that you're often put into when you're being transported, which makes things quicker and more manageable for them.
Right.
And then you may come out of that state on a craft. You may not come out of that state for whatever reason. But if you do slip out of that altered state and you find yourself consciously confronted with an entity that's got a big head and it's pale and it's got big black eyes and it's expressionless and it's doing something to you, then you're going to feel fear, and that fear is going to immediately cut you off from any telepathic communication they may be trying to make with you. It's going to cut you off from any feelings of love or care that they're trying to emanate to you. That's only one example. I know that many abductees wouldn't agree with that, but it is a logical possibility. And also, I think it just depends on what part of the program or agenda you may be a part of, and what your purpose is and why you're there and what part of the program you're a part of.
Yeah. And fear cuts you off from your logic as well.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. I'm not going to go. I was just thinking of a story when I hurt my knee. My girlfriend wanted to see what I had done, and it was really ugly. And I said, if you see this, you will go into fear and I'll lose you. I won't have someone who can help me, right? And she said, show me what you've done. And when she saw it, she went into panic. And it just cut her off from any logic. And and she ran off, and I'm like, oh my God, she's useless now. So exactly, fear you lose, it just loses you. It loses any sort of reason, logic. Oh, all right. So these beings that are helping us evolve now, the particular ones that you communicate with, they've been really the mothers and fathers to humanity and human consciousness for as long as human consciousness has been inhabiting physical form and life on this planet, haven't they? It's like people talk about, alien contact started in the 50s or the 60s or the 70s. They give these silly dates, or, the Sumerian times or the Egyptian times, but it's just been all time. There's no time where they have not been overseeing this planet in some way. Are they the mob that you hang out with? Are they been sort of overseeing humanity for as long as humanity's... inhabited Earth?
I've been told by the Greys that they were called in to to take part in this particular agenda, and that is why in many of these contact experiences, we're very often, not always, but very often we interface with a Grey.
Right.
Not always, it may be reptilian or other species, but very often one of the most common ones in my research is a Grey, also human-like looking entities. But as to whether they have actually been part of the scientific process or development process associated with this planet long term, I don't know. I suspect that there have been other species who've come in and done things over the centuries and decades and thousands of years. And it may be that some of these species that I'm talking about have not got such a long association with the planet, that they've come more recently to assist. Right. Because they have certain skills that are required in this process of raising evolution and carrying out certain tasks.
Right. I was thinking that the mantids had probably been around since time began. I don't know. I get a sense that they seem to be the architects of the universe. With time, so they have a completely different lifespan and time than we do as humans. They would see souls, like one life as a Grey would see a soul maybe incarnate into a few human lives, wouldn't they? Because their time is different to us.
Yes, I don't know about the time factor. I mean, time exists in our understanding. They have to comply, shall I say, with our understanding of time when they're bringing a lot of people on board craft for various reasons. But yes, I have seen on craft what I call the root stock of the Greys, which probably isn't particularly complimentary, if I can put it that way. But I've seen these Greys that appear to be extremely ancient. They're not very tall, and so that sort of blows away the theory that a lot of people have, that the tall Greys are the intelligent ones and the tall Greys are the bosses and the little Greys are cloned workers. Well, that may be the case. It's not what I have experienced. Right. But these Greys are extremely lined. They're much smaller and very, very old and very revered. And I have seen them on only a handful of occasions at times when something has been happening with the group of humans I've been in that was significant to them for some reason. And I've seen them appear, and they maintained as a pure race, if I can put it that way. And I get, that's why I call them the rootstock, because from them they have developed these different species and strains of Greys, from my understanding.
So would they, in our time, be hundreds, maybe thousands of years old, these little guys that are wrinkled?
I don't know.
You don't know.
I've never been told that. It's possible.
So, Suzy, what have you learnt from, because you're a communicator or contactee or experiencer as well as a researcher, what have you learnt from people that you've worked with in your research that you didn't know from your experiences? Probably a lot.
Yeah, a lot. Because there are so many different kinds of experiences out there, and there are people who have had random experiences that don't relate to my own experiences in any way, but which seem perfectly feasible in terms of what I understand of contact. And then there's people who've had experiences very similar to mine, and they've been able to corroborate technology or activities or perspectives, all kinds of things. And when you get that corroboration coming together, I think that is our initial form of evidence starting to form. You have the skeptics and the scientists calling out for evidence. Well, good corroborative evidence, such as I've been coming across in recent years, is the first step towards that, I believe, because you can't take a photo on the craft, it's not going to happen. You can't steal something off the craft, they're not going to let you. And all those facile arguments that skeptics put forward, why don't you do this or why don't you do that? And that's because they don't understand the environment on the craft when you're on there and what you're there for. So I think what I have learned is the resilience of mankind, and actually how far we can stretch ourselves, and actually how amazing our brain and our consciousness is, and how far we will go in the future. But it's that bringing the spirituality up planetary wise, so that we become a planetary species. At the moment, we're not even a planetary species because we're totally divided into little segments, and until we can create some unity, we don't have that strength of consciousness and that commitment to conform, if I can put it that way, not in a negative sense, but to actually have the commitment to make changes on the planet that's going to benefit us and benefit other species out there who may be affected if we blow ourselves up.
Well, I know conformity. I think that, the human mind we love to talk about how individual we are. It's like me and my and different to you, and we love to celebrate the difference between us. And I think that we think it's going to be boring if we kind of have this hive mind that the higher extra dimensional beings have. But I think that that's probably a misconstrued concept too. Like, how do we maintain our individuality and still have a collective consciousness that's more of a cooperative hive mind, as you say, conform to a more positive agenda than,
I think there's conformity and conformity.
Yeah.
I think what the ETs have been able to do is maintain some individuality. And I have seen that as a child. I was taken into their living quarters on the craft when I was 12, and I was shown ways that they relax and have some time out.
Right.
And so through those mediums, through that technology and those activities, they can maintain some individuality. But what they've learned to do is control that so that it doesn't, their individuality is not so selfish and not so ego-based that it affects the whole, it affects the whole of their society. And I think that's what's happening to us today. We're also concerned about being individual. We see conformity as a negative thing. Well, yes, it can be if it's focused on a negative act or a negative faction, but conformity can also be translated under those circumstances to that word that's very important to me, and that's commitment.
Yeah.
And conform to a commitment to the planet and to changing things in a positive sense. That's not losing your individuality. It's using your individuality to choose something that is positive and constructive, and to join with other people of like mind. And I think that's where we're going wrong. We haven't understood that yet. Yeah.
I know. I think about this every day. How do we, it says my internet connection's not good, but how do we help people understand that? How do we raise people's consciousness so that they get it? I think definitely spreading loving messages and more connective, positive messages is the way I try to do it. Because when you feel that love, you're more concerned, you're more empathetic towards the plight of the planet or the animals, or Yeah,
I think it's a timing thing for every person. But I think leading by, showing by example, being actively involved in positive pursuits, and sharing that with your friends and family and workmates, even in a small way, can cause that flow-on effect.
Yeah. I think that the reality of the connectivity between all of us is something that we need to understand to maybe help You speak about in the book, and I've heard you say this on other shows, you know, when we set off the bomb, how the impact of that had such an effect on beyond this world. Like, there's nothing that you can do or think that doesn't affect the consciousness of all. You know, people have spoken about this for years. The butterfly's wings in Africa is affecting, you know, me over here and you in New Zealand and me in Australia or whatever. But there is this connectivity of consciousness and energy, that so what we do think and feel and what we do, how we do act, does affect the whole. Do you want to talk about what you saw when the bomb went off and what they showed you?
My chapter in my book is called The Galaxy Screen, and I was with a group of humans who had been divided into groups by the greys, and there were several greys with each group, and I can describe it like in a large room in what we just would describe as a buzz group situation, where there were groups of greys and humans sitting around, and they were finding out about our lives and our hobbies and the things that interest us. So they were informing themselves about these everyday aspects of our lives. And I expressed an interest in space. Not that I'm any astronomer or astrophysicist, but I love it. And so one of the greys, because they're very hot on educating you immediately if you express an interest in something,
right,
said, do you want to come in and look at something related to that? So I said yes. So off we went immediately up this spiral ramp that I understood went up to the top of the craft. And I was taken into a room which was initially confusing because I could see that it was a square shape, but it seemed spherical. So there was this real confusion about what am I in here?
Yeah.
And in the center of the room on a pedestal was this big sloping screen, and it was divided into thousands of or hundreds of little grids, like a math grid, and superimposed over underneath that grid was our Milky Way galaxy, was our galaxy. And that's why I nicknamed it the Galaxy Screen. And he showed me how just by touching a grid, he could bring up into the air around in the room this a holographic display. You might want to call it augmented reality. So he could bring up whatever was in that. So be it a dust cloud, or be it a group of planets or whatever. Then he could zoom them in and out. So we played around with that for a bit. He let me touch some grids and see what came up. It was phenomenal, and he I won't go into it, but he described what their database was like, which just completely blew Dr. Schild's mind when we talked about this. So then he said to me, okay, I'm going to show you something because this will help you with your sense of commitment in your life. And he reached into my mind, as I've described before, and he drew out a phrase which was, this will give you fire in your belly. So he then brought up the grid that had our planet in it, and he made it so that Earth was hanging there. And he talked about how something had happened in our recent past, which was extremely significant, which was why a lot of races have come to the planet before that time and just after. And he asked me to prepare myself because I was going to see something sobering. And then he began to reduce the size of the planet, and I saw the eruption take place, and I saw the etheric, or the shock waves that went out through our magnetic field, right out, and he kept reducing the size of the planet down smaller and smaller so that I could see that shock wave going further and further and further out. And the further it went out through the solar system and into space, the wider it got, and it seemed like the more unstable the waves got of motion.
Sort of wobbly.
And he said, this is the effect that goes out, that you don't, as a species, do not understand the harm that you are doing and the harm that could be wreaked upon other civilizations out there. It was a very sobering experience. I have discussed this in depth with my good friend Robert Salas, who is the military whistleblower in the States, who talks about his Malmstrom Air Force Base experience when the atomic warheads were Minuteman missiles were brought up out of the ground and were switched off by a UFO that came over the base.
Yeah.
So he understands deeply how I would have felt when I saw that, because now, of course, he's an anti-nuclear campaigner.
Right.
He's gone full circle. And so that was a very sobering experience, and it brought home to me what you were talking about a minute ago, Karen, about how everything affects everything else. And I didn't know, I sort of found that amazing and fascinating way back then. But of course, it's only just recently, in recent years, we've had high-speed photography that is able to pick up the shock waves from explosions and missiles, etc. We can see that shock wave going out into our own atmosphere. So you multiply that to an atomic or nuclear explosion, and you've got a much bigger vibratory wave that's going out there.
Oh, there's a few things I want to say. Okay, waves. I want to talk about waves, first wave, second wave, because, like Dolores Cannon, has talked about the first, second, third wave. But, as I heard it, it was like when that shock wave went out, that's when as she put it, but you've got a slightly expanded version of this, the first wave started incarnating wave of consciousness of people coming to the planet. But in my little group, we have an online discussion group. We were talking about one of the people in the group had read a book, and it said in the book that the ETs have disarmed all nuclear weapons on the planet. And she said, what do you think of that? So I asked my mob, and they said, well, they're not disarmed as such, but if they were to activate them, they would be disarmed, because they just won't let it happen. The ET presence won't let it happen anymore because of what you've spoken about. But they said to me that we still think we haven't, let the consciousness of the people that hold these, they still think they have this power in their hands, but the truth is that we won't let them use it. Is that something that you've confirmed with your mob?
No, that actually hasn't ever been confirmed to me. I still think that they're allowing us time to make our own decisions and to deal with our own problems. It's interesting you raised Dolores Cannon and the three waves, because I'd just like to make a bit of a statement here. In 2007, I spoke at a conference in Sydney, and that was the first time I had ever introduced a little bit of information at the end of my speech about the three waves, and I put some charts up that I'd formulated from the information the Greys had been giving me about this since the age of 8 right through adulthood.
Yeah.
And Dolores visited Sydney a couple of months, 3 or so months later, and was given a copy of my DVD.
Right.
And within a couple of months, she was speaking about the three waves, and then put out a book just before I did. So I just wanted to make the point that I was talking about this a long time ago. What Dolores actually states in her book about the three waves is quite limited, and I think I have a much broader perspective on the three waves. From my understanding, they began incarnating well over 100 years ago. Right. And I've just actually written an article about a lady in New Zealand who would be well into her 80s now. She was still alive, and I consider that she was a first waver. She was a real enlightener. And the first wave also includes, it's quite a complex description that I give in my book about it. The first wave also includes what some people call the star kids. I think that's an overused term now, but the star kids are purported by some researchers to be the be-all and end-all, and they're here to save us and all the rest. But that's not what was explained to me by the ETs over the years, that they are just a smaller part of the first wave, and that it's actually the third wave that I describe in my book that will take us into the future and be the game changers, and create that change from within which is what we were talking about a minute ago, whether or not the ETs would let us blow ourselves up. From my understanding, they're letting these third wavers get into position to try to change things, to try to change some of the old structures, belief systems and institutions on the planet, so we can actually move forward and put a stop to some of these things before they have to step in and be like the occupying force to do that. They want us to do it.
Yeah, well, that's the communication I got, that in the minds of the people that hold the weapons, they still believe they have that power as a nuclear force.
Yes.
But if they were to detonate it, that's when they would step in, because of the effect that it would have on the rest of the universe. But in their own minds, they want us to change our minds and say we don't want to use it. Like, they're giving us that opportunity to change our minds. They're not saying, right, your weapons are all disarmed. They're giving us that opportunity. But, you know, to talk about the first wave, when you talk about the first wave, I think of people like Madame Blavatsky, who was in the 18th century or 19th century.
Yes, that's right.
And, there were, you know, and Yogananda, like there were quite a few beings on the planet that were amazing beings.
They were enlightening people, and they were
Florence
interesting people too. Like my great aunts, for example, in New Zealand, who were in groups in Auckland, and the early spiritual groups and spiritualist groups and healing groups that were quite unusual for a very small conservative population, but they were right in there involved in that. And I think they began to open people's minds to possibilities. And there's always been people on the planet who are doing that. But I think we had quite a little upswing there for a while, and some people became quite prominent because of it.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking that after the war, you know, like the baby boomer generation, I think that definitely they upped the ante, didn't they? They definitely sent more souls into bodies that would be, look, just in my experience, so I'm in my mid-50s now. When I was in my 30s, I was running the Academy of Light. I was surrounded by women in their 50s and 60s and 70s. Like, I was surrounded by an older generation that were all talking about consciousness and meditation and stuff. And I wasn't surrounded by people in my like when I was in my 30s, I was not surrounded by my age group. Now that I'm in my 50s, it's funny, I said, you know, I'm surrounded by these fat old women, and now I've become one of the fat old women. Now I see this wave that you talk about, and they're in their 20s and 30s who were children then, who are incredible. You know, in Australia, they've got these startups, like they're doing this stuff. It's amazing what they're doing. It's just incredible. Creating technology and creating businesses that help put, you know, wells in Africa, and just amazing things that really in really practical ways, really practical ways. Just geniuses, just these intelligent young human beings doing amazing things. And
that's right, Karen. And in relation to the older generation, I think the second wave, that I describe in my book, is the wave that I'm in, and that's that's more of a finite wave, because it in the chart I do, it comes down like this. It doesn't extend into the future. The first wave keeps extending into the future, with souls incarnating with that purpose. The third wave keeps extending into the future, but that second wave is finite, but there's millions or hundreds of thousands of people in that second wave who are going to really start coming out of their shells and talking about their experiences. And I say this in my speeches, you know, there'll be grandparents and there'll be great-grandparents. They'll have led all kinds of interesting lives. They'll be respected by family and community, and suddenly they'll feel a need to talk about something that happened to them years ago that they've never really described to anyone.
Right, and you call them the communicators, right?
Yeah, and when this starts coming out, that's really going to up the ante, because so many people are going to say, but that's a respected person, you know, and they're saying this, that they experienced this when they were younger, And I really think that's going to be a little game changer that happens along the timeline. And the third waivers that I talk about, I think that the Greys referred to them as the concealed ones, not in a negative sense, but simply that they are not overt. They're not out there like the first waivers who, star kids or whatever people like to label them. They're not out there openly showing these abilities. They are more focused, like the Greys are, on getting into positions of power and authority in a positive sense, not a negative sense, in their 30s and 40s and late 20s, so that when a time comes and the timeline convergences hits the right note, they are in the right place to positions of authority to make those changes. When the time comes that people demand the changes, they're in the position to, okay, do it.
Right.
And they will have all of these psychic things that we attribute to star kids, but they keep it under wraps and they use it through their day-to-day work in a way that's subtle, that doesn't draw attention to themselves, because it's most important to the Greys that they are not seen as different, like many of the so-called star kids different. They must be seen as good human beings with extraordinary talents that people respect.
Yeah.
And so they're the ones who are going to move us on into the future.
I see many of them all the time. Yeah, I really do. Yeah. But I guess that, like you're in that second wave, I'm in that second wave. I think I speak to the second wave as my mandate is to support, accelerate, and help, activate the New World teachers. They're the communicators, the people that, to give you a voice, just to give you share your story. That's what I feel like. I mean,
exactly.
That's what I do.
You're certainly doing that very well, Karen.
Thanks, darling. So are you. We're doing our job, honey. We're doing our job. But
yes,
it just makes sense. It all makes sense. I'd love to get into that a bit more. But anyway, so you're going to be out in Australia very soon. I don't know how long we've been talking, forever. What time did we start? About 10 o'clock. That's not too bad. So you're going to be in Sydney in July. We're in June at the moment. Do you want to tell people where you're going to be?
Okay, well, I'm going to start off in Brisbane speaking for UFO Research Queensland, and I'll be speaking there on, I think it's the 29th, and then I'll be flying through to Sydney on the 30th, and I'll be speaking at the UFO PRSA UFO and Paranormal Group in Campbelltown on the 5th of July, and I'll be speaking at UFO Research New South Wales on the 7th. I
think I've got it here somewhere, but and that's in Ryde.
Yes, I think it's in Ryde.
Ryde, yeah. Where are you staying when you come to Sydney? Are you staying in a hotel?
Well, I haven't heard yet, but I'm going to be doing some research with researcher friends over there, and going to visit a Kiwi who works, is part of my staff on UFOCUS NZ, but he lives in Australia. He's a New Zealander. So we're going to be doing a bit of historic research together. So it's more of a research combination speaking trip.
Oh, beautiful. Oh, darling, there's so much more we could talk about. I wanted to touch on the, you meeting the soul of your son before he incarnated into the physical body, but people will just have to read it in the book, won't they?
I think so, yeah.
So
my book is available on Amazon as a Kindle and as a paperback, and it's available on Barnes & Noble. And if people want one of the copies, the few copies I've got left that actually have coloured images in, they can go to www.communicatorlink.com and they can purchase it directly from me there.
Oh, okay. So you've got a few with colour images in there. Are you going to be bringing books with you to Sydney?
Oh, well, yes, I'll be bringing some of the ones with coloured images.
With the colour, beautiful.
They'll be available at the speeches.
Oh, gorgeous. And also I'll put my Amazon links up on my website. If you want to support the show, you can always buy the books on Amazon through my affiliate links, and that gives me a few cents and it supports the show because, I do the show out of the love and not for the money. I don't get paid to do this, as you do. You're not getting paid to do this either, but it's just crazy that we need to be paid to do anything on this planet. You know, the ETs are well beyond this whole money system that we're involved in. I can't wait for us to get with the program like they are.
That's right.
It'd make life much easier on this planet if we had that sort of consciousness that they have. But Suzy, it's been absolute joy and a pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Karen. I hope I get to meet you in Sydney.
I'm definitely going to come to the Sydney one in July and buy one of the books. So that'll be an absolute joy.
I'll look forward to that.
Okay, another fascinating conversation with Suzy Hansen. There was so much more that we didn't speak about. I just ran out of time. She had to go and get the car fixed. All these practical things we have to do as humans. But the technology on board the ships, that was something I wanted to talk about too. She sent me a photograph of a light elevator. Some people called it a teleporter, where you step into this beam of light and you just think about where you want to go in the form of an image, like a symbol. The symbol represents where you want to go to different parts of the ship, and you're instantly transported there in this beam of light. Isn't it fantastic? I just love it. I can't wait for that technology to be more inside the human world. But we need to raise our consciousness first before we can play with technology like that. We need to be a bit more connected and a bit more loving and caring of each other and the other beings that live on this planet, the animal beings, the plant beings, the rock beings, the earth herself. So thank you again for watching another show, Accentuating the Positive, Expanding Consciousness. And I'm going to go and have another cup of tea, lemon and ginger cup of tea. Winter here in Australia, as you can see, we're all rugged up. And I will see you again for another show next time. I've got a few people coming up in July. We're going to talk about astral traveling and all sorts of things coming up. So stay tuned for more shows expanding your awareness and consciousness. Bye for now.